Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Site Visit. I want to talk about this staircase. This staircase has been something that we've designed from the very beginning of the job. I just wanted to walk through what we're looking at, some of the details that really make this staircase special, starting with the baseboard. Obviously, we have this flush baseboard detail throughout. We talked about that a number of times, but you can see how it kind of runs around and up these two platforms. Now, the premise behind the design of the staircase was really to make this staircase have these, floating treads between two beams, which you see this one beam, the other one being kind of emulated by the trim in the wall, landing on top of two oak cubes. So let's talk about these oak cubes for a moment. Number one, we have head height issues. So we needed to have this winder situation. And with winder situation, you oftentimes run into code issues. So we worked really closely with the design to make sure that this was going to be code compliant. If the client's watching this, I really tried to push for a curved wall in that corner. And she constantly reminds me how I was wrong about it, and she's glad she stuck with the nice 90-degree corner. I still feel strongly, I think the curved wall would have looked great, but not my house, and I think that looks just as great. Well, maybe slightly less great. The oak cubes. So essentially we had a lot of framing structure, but we also had this condition with head height, and we were also constrained on the overall length of the staircase. So we had to model this up, make sure everything worked. And then from there we decided that these two oak cubes would be what this staircase would land on top of. A couple of the details that you see, we have this negative reveal underneath. It's about a 1/4 inch deep, 1/2 inch tall. So we're the same height as our flush baseboard, but rather than, say 4 or 5 inches up, we're at the bottom, allowing these to look as though they're kind of stacked on each other, but they're also very light, and they have this, very intentional separation. Again, kind of getting that, kind of floating cube look. Now, this bottom cube here is, obviously a big square, and everything, of course, for us, everything is grain matched. This oak is grain matched throughout, but it's also capturing the end of this glass. We needed support in the glass, so we actually buried the channel, and then that piece of oak actually runs all the way through into the piece on the opposite side of this glass. Now, if you stand back here, we have this weird ceiling detail, and what typically, this piece would come all the way across and stop, and you'd have this kind of plastered, soffit. We decided to continue that detail straight down, just so you were getting this stacking effect. Again, keeping the 1/2 inch reveal all the way up, and then that top cube, again, being where everything lands on it. Obviously, I always point this stuff out in the video because someone else is going to. We got to fix that up there. So most of that's paint, but we do have to fix that. Then you have this beam. So this is actually a giant steel beam that Costa Fabrication fabricated for us, and then Supreme Glass actually gave us an aluminum channel for this glass to sit in. Now, a lot of times you'll see that aluminum channel sit on top of the floor system or even the edge of the staircase, and you see the glass sit in it. We didn't want to see any structure for this glass. We wanted to make sure everything was buried. So number one, this beam got, while the steel is only, say, this high, our aluminum channel is this high, and then we padded this beam out with plywood and ultimately blue board on both sides to allow us to plaster this. So this beam's actually all plaster, with the exception of the top cap. Now the top cap is made by Pitcon, very similar to like Fry Reglet. They make plaster and drywall aluminum profiles. We opted, or I shouldn't say we, but the guys at Van Gerven opted to do this in one piece. So you have one piece here, which then is mitered, but rather than coming down each side of the glass and then mitering the corners, I'll take this corner guard off for a moment. Rather than mitering these corners, this piece of 6-inch cap is actually one piece all the way up. And they ran it through a table saw and dadoed for the glass. They actually painted below the glass black before this went in, and this piece just kind of rolled all the way in and all the way up. So they did the same thing actually on the bottom here. So this is the same thing. They have this 6-inch cap that comes down and wraps around the glass. Oddly enough, if we turn around here, this piece of blue board actually had to be removed so we could actually slide that cap up and then down over the glass. Really, really difficult. Again, you could have done it in multiple pieces, but we chose just, you know, the less amount of seams, the less that we have to deal with, you know, potentially cracking or just being something that, you know, translates through the finish coat of the paint. We wanted this flush transition, so you can see like this end here lines perfectly up with this miter joint. We wanted that to be intentional. We also wanted this to be intentional. This width is equal to this width, so there's this, you know, symmetry here, but also the plaster has a stop bead at the bottom edge here. We spaced it up off the oak, so when they finish this oak, they'll sand that, you'll have this nice crisp line, slight separation. Typically we're using that piece of ram board to separate it, and giving the, you know, celebrating that these are two very different materials. But you can see just how like intentional all of this is, you know, in the way it lines up. It's the same thing up top here. You know, this is plaster, but it's a different item. It's a beam, it's a staircase. We don't want it to be blended into the ceiling. So when they plastered this first, and then when they plastered the ceiling, they ran a stop bead, again, using that piece of ram board, keeping the ceiling separated. So you're celebrating the fact that this is separate from the structure. That wraps all the way around here. You can see that line comes around here, and then that carries across underneath that very top tread. And then we pick up our negative reveal on the wall, and that negative reveal falls all the way down and then hits the top of that first oak cube. Now, the reason that we ran that negative reveal on the wall is, I think I said it in the beginning of this video, is that we wanted this staircase to appear as though it was supported by two beams on either side. Now, realistically, it's just bolted to the actual brick wall on the other side of this plaster, but we wanted to replicate, you know, the depth of that beam on the depth of the wall. So that's exactly what we did, is we basically ran a 1x material with a negative reveal on both sides, and that was the same height as that, so everything, you know, worked out, you know, in conjunction on both sides, but also created this really nice separation and really nice detail to go from stair back into our flush baseboard. Now, I do want to talk about, let's walk up this way, this detail here. So we actually installed these treads, and then the guys at Van Gerven actually stop beaded around each and every tread. So we have our stop bead, again, using that ram board as a spacer. You have this tight reveal all the way around every tread. So it almost looks as though the oak is being extruded out from behind that plaster, which is a really clean detail. You know, it's much easier to accomplish that than trying to paint a really tight line, or even caulk that and then paint that and have it crack over time. So really great detail. I'm glad we went that route. Now, I talked about the glass, I talked about the C-channel being buried, I talked about the glass being buried in the oak below. You can see it's buried here as well. So up in the ceiling, this was just a small channel that we painted black, buried it up in the ceiling. All of this glass went in prior to plaster, prior to finish, to make sure that when you step back, literally nothing was visible except for, you know, the edges of the glass. And you can actually see it up here too as we work our way up. This edge here, we actually buried our C-channel again into the floor system. We actually cut our floor joist back and then bolted this aluminum structural C-channel underneath the wood floor, and then added our oak nosing at the very end. So that glass is buried into the floor. And then the last detail is, number one, it's one piece of glass. Oftentimes you see these 3 to 4 foot sections. We didn't want to do that. One piece of glass. We opted for laminate, and then brought this all the way back and ran an aluminum channel in the wall. So you get that structural ability to hold that glass tight. But that channel's in the wall, it's mounted, and then again, we painted everything black. You know, obviously we're in the midst of it. We got to clean a lot of this up. But now when you stand back here, there's no channel that's blocking. You're getting this completely coplanar, you know, wall on either side. It's really well detailed. It's really well executed. And that's just, you know, I wanted to kind of walk through some of these details because these are the things that are really going to make this place pop. I don't think I've ever said pop, but I'm going to go for it. It makes it pop because there's it's really simple in the way it looks. There's very little for your eye to trip over. Between the plaster devices that we talked about last week, between all the reglet details and the reveal details and the staircase details and the minimal, things that you're going to see, like we're trying to make that glass look as though it's floating in space, where reality there's a lot of structure below. To the handrail brackets that we'll talk about in a future episode, where everything is plastered around the structural connection to the wall. You're not seeing the typical escutcheon on that wall. You're just seeing a piece of stainless sticking out. So these are the details that we're going to dig into. If you guys have questions, please drop them below. I'm happy to walk through it. These are the things that really get me excited. This is what we continue to aim to set ourselves apart and really just go for excellence and really all of the micro details. So at the end, we have this macro achievement. Guys, stay tuned for another episode of NS Builders Podcast next week, as well as Ken's series Revealed. And then we'll see you next week on Site Visit. Thanks, man. Thank you.